Graveyard shift here, don't I? Is everybody worn out? Are you ready for another more techno babble? No, just kidding. As a kid, I was 8 years old, and this was 1948 on the night that Truman upset Dewey. Kind of dates me a little bit. And on that evening, I got turned on to rocketry. And so this morning it was nice to revisit rocketry and to see how it can really be done, not the way it's being done now with these behemoth chemical rockets. But, you know, I think we really live in a dark age. Perhaps the attendance at this conference, there's quality, not quantity. And it's sort of like we're holding the flame here, folks, and yet at the same time we're not getting any younger. I notice the average age here is about my age, so I feel very included in this group. And this weekend happens to be a midsummer in what otherwise has not been that active a summer. A midsummer situation where everything happened this weekend. So I got in at 2 in the morning, and we're going to be, hopefully anyway, advising through the efforts of David Williams and Hal Fox here. Hi Hal, it's good to see you. Welcome. And I think we're trying to create a revolution here, but we need help. It's not going to happen the way you'd think it would happen. When I was a kid, I had all of the optimism that any young child would have about our future in space. And indeed, the space program unfolded in ways that went way beyond our wildest dreams. Now we're hooked in a fossil fuel age, which is devastating to humanity. Tens of millions of deaths per year from toxic pollution. More disaster relief budgets that have gone up tenfold because of climate change induced by human-induced global warming due to the routine burning of fossil fuels. Some future historian, when they look back upon our time and they see that America, this great country, which I grew up in and learned to be very patriotic in World War II, we were the good guys. We're not the good guys anymore. And obviously, to many of you, what I'm saying is very obvious. And yet, somehow or other, our country has become dumbed down. I had no idea this would happen. I thought by now we would be taking the path of innovation in the American tradition, the tradition of entrepreneurs and inventors, where the skids are greased, so to speak, to help these people bring clean technologies for the future. And yet what's happening is somehow or other we've become mesmerized. We're into a Roman bread and circuses routine. And we have King George in charge, a very weird king, somebody who is dictating policies that respond to the cartels, to the oil industry, to the natural gas industry, where pockets are being lined beyond belief. I would never have dreamed that America in 2001 would become the monster it's become. Now, I'm sorry. I think that I'm being patriotic in saying this, and it just really troubles me deeply. And yet, at the same time, the other side of that sword is innovation itself. And I see that many of you here at this conference are very, very aware of what is possible in the future if only that spark of invention that you all represent could be nurtured, that flame be brought into creating energy sources that are clean and renewable and safe, and to get off and unhook from the fossil fuel age. 1950 is a good benchmark year. We saw the picture of the V2 rocket there. And now I'm going to, I have overhead projector and slides, but it'll be really interesting to see how this thing works. Whoop, upside down. So the format of this, almost everything I do here is up and down. So that's not going to work too well, is it? Well, we'll do what we can. This is my 10th trade book that I've written. It's called Re-Inheriting the Earth, Awakening to Sustainable Solutions and Greater Truths. And these two subjects, somehow or other, are not marketable in America. So I'm going to Europe with it this fall. I'm going to be over in Europe for a couple of months, just traveling up and down from Findhorn all the way to Portugal, and a number of points in between, because the Europeans are obviously more open to innovation and change. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to, I could have done it with my credentials and my credibility, which is shot because of my embracing the subjects that are near and dear to all of us. And by the way, the research is not exotic, it's only exotic with respect to this crazy culture that we're embedded in. And we're going to have to somehow massage the culture. We're going to have to somehow just keep at it and keep the flame burning so that we don't get discouraged and we don't get too distracted by bread and circuses, the consumer culture that's now perhaps reaching its zenith. 1950 is a year I like to use as a reference point. I was 10 years old then. I had a lot of idealism. I was into rockets then. I was trying to figure out, I was reading anything that Wernher von Braun wrote, or Billy Lay, or Arthur C. Clarke. 1950 is a good reference year because around then we could have gone in one direction or another. And I think we went the direction of negativity. And somehow or other, it's maybe incumbent on those of us in this room to initiate the change, to make the pendulum swing back the other way, to undo our fossil fuel binge addiction that we've been involved in over the past particularly 50 years. I'll give you a few statistics about what's happened in the 50 years or so since the year 1950. Now, in 1950, the year 1950, I was idealistic. I was a boy that loved to be in nature, go up into the mountains of New Hampshire, and I remember being on Lake Winnipesaukee as a camper in the summers. And now and then you'd hear an outboard motor rip through the air going by, but by and large it was very peaceful, very natural. And now nature keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Since 1950, energy use worldwide has gone up 4 times. Right now, the United States consumes as much energy as the entire world did in the year 1950. The population has doubled since 1950, a little bit more than doubled, so the per capita energy use has gone way up. Now, if you look at America's consuming lifestyle, it's almost a joke that our president not only doesn't want to ratify Kyoto, which is a very mild political agreement and not nearly enough to undo global warming, but he believes that the non-industrialized countries ought to be joining the industrialized countries to sign the Kyoto agreements, where the increment in fossil fuel use and carbon dioxide input into the atmosphere has actually almost entirely been created by the United States versus third world countries. And it is just such an embarrassment to me to be an American and to see this happening. And it should piss us all off. You know, I have a bumper sticker in my car. It says, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off." Well, we've been asleep at the wheel. We have had opportunities. In the 1970s, I worked for Mo Udall on his Energy and Environment Subcommittee in Washington, D.C. And at that time, we had a perception that there was an energy crisis. Now, California had an energy crisis. But there's a bottom line to all this. Last weekend, I was in Aspen listening to a number of speakers, including Amory Lovins, who's very well known in the energy efficiency area. And Amory Lovins posited the question, having just dissected the California energy crisis in such detail, he was able to basically say, okay, there is skullduggery going on here, and it's almost impossible to follow the money, except that it went through these labyrinthian corridors out of the consumer's pocket into the pockets of some of the energy suppliers. Take Enron, for example. Enron is now number 4 or 5 in the Fortune 500 list, beaten only by ExxonMobil and a few other companies. And by the way, the 10 largest companies in the world, 8 of them are involved in fossil fuel energy, directly or indirectly. It has totally taken us over as a culture worldwide. And we should be pissed, and we should do something about it, because we have solutions. The solutions have been coming up all weekend here in this very group. And even if we don't go to the more culturally exotic resources, such as zero-point energy or cold fusion or hydrogen gas cells or some of the other technologies that are online, even if we don't go that route for whatever reason, there are other routes we can take. Obviously, there are various solar and wind power options. And of course, there's hydrogen. So we'll be talking a little bit today about some of these sources of energy. And first of all, I want to take a straw poll of you out there. I'm scheduled to give a workshop tomorrow morning, but I could, apparently I've been given the option by the organizers here to do it later this afternoon. There's going to be a session from about 1 to 3 or 4 or whatever with David Williams. That will be happening, or it could even be an overlapped event. But just a straw poll, if I were to hold a workshop either later this afternoon or first thing tomorrow morning, would you attend this afternoon or tomorrow morning? This afternoon, let's see a show of hands. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if I were to do it tomorrow morning, how many would come? 1. Looks like it's going to happen this afternoon. All right, that's cool. That's fine. I know some people might show up tomorrow morning. I'll still be here in the morning, so we could have an informal discussion, whatever. Okay, let's go back to some of the environmental statistics. I talked about energy. What about some other things? Well, since 1950, the number of automobiles in the world has gone up tenfold. Fertilizer use has gone up tenfold. The use of water has gone up threefold, and now we are hitting the wall. We're at a point now globally where, in terms of natural resources, we're at about the halfway depleted point, with rapidly accelerating depletion going on in these natural resources. Oil, we're about half depleted, and there's going to be a big rollover at some point. This is where oil becomes permanently scarce, where oil production will have peaked and will start to decrease as there's increasing scarcity. Well, the people in control of these resources have rigged the market so that they're going to be fine. They're going to make billions and billions of dollars. But meanwhile, the rest of us are going to have to pay more and more and more. Meanwhile, of course, we're polluting the atmosphere. We're creating global warming, climate change. And the United States leads the world into a lemming-like future if we don't do something about it. And there's absolutely no reason why we can't go to the Capitol as citizens and share with the Governor's Energy Commission. My buddy, colleague, former astronaut Rusty Schweigert used to be the chairman of the California Energy Commission, and I used to have contact with those people back in the days when I was more, quote, credible. But you see, the credibility is lost as a result of advocating what makes complete sense. Why have we dumbed down ourselves to the point? USA Today had a cover article entitled 6 Ways to Combat Global Warming. And do you know what those 6 ways are? First of all, there was no mention made of new energy research, no mention made of hydrogen, no mention made of solar or wind, no mention made of increasing energy efficiency. These were the 6, quote, solutions, or the 6 ways of combating global warming. And this is what we're up against, folks, in the dumbing down of America. We have solution number 1, ratify Kyoto, and then they said parenthetically, so that we'll keep them away, keep the pressure away. Just ratify it, say, okay, we'll find ways to cut back our emissions to the 1990 levels by the year 2010, and maybe even a small increment percentage. That's not going to stop the global warming. That's not going to stop the sea levels from rising. That's not going to stop the climate change and the disaster relief budgets that have gone up tenfold in the last 10 years. This is serious business. Makes me want to cry to see how this country is leading the world down the tubes. And this should be the time that we should be talking to our political, quote, leaders, and especially here in Sacramento. I mean, this is a place we could do it. We could really create an atmosphere of dialogue about the real solutions. And the real solutions are there. But part of the new advocacy, I think, has to be a balanced look and debate. And of course, the debate has been narrowed so much. I've got a great quote here, if I can find it. I left it somewhere. Maybe it's in my pocket. Nope. That's all right. I'll give you a couple of quotes here. Here's one from the late David Brower, who is a true environmentalist. Boy, have I become green when I've started to see what humans have done to this planet. There's no choice but to be green. We have to stand and be counted, folks, and we can do it. We are no longer inheriting the earth from our parents. We are stealing it from our children. That's indeed what's happening. Let me give you a few more frightening statistics. The amount of forests left in the earth. You know, I said we're at the halfway point where the resources have depleted. We're at about that point in oil. We're at that point with water. And guess what, folks? These people that want to take over our agricultural resources also want to take over the water. 3 corporations, Monsanto, Bechtel, and Enron, are planning to take over all of the urban water supplies on the earth. Would you trust these folks to deliver your water? Do you trust Exxon and Mobil to deliver your oil? Do you trust Enron to deliver your natural gas? After Enron quintupled their wholesale prices for natural gas, creating a bit of a crisis here, right? Why are we so complacent? That's right. Oh, so it's Enron Field? Is that the name of the field here? Yeah. Can't we get kind of stimulated here? I mean, I know this sounds like a political rally, but my God. Oh, here's another quote. So that's a David Brower. This is a quote from presidential candidate Al Gore. Remember him? We must make the rescue of the environment the central organizing principle for civilization. That was from his book, 1992 book, Earth in the Balance. And did he say anything about that during his campaign? No. He was dumbed down. And the quote I'm looking for is basically, but I can kind of give you the synopsis of it, is that somehow or other we have societally narrowed the range of debate. And that narrowing of the range of debate gives the appearance that there's debate, because opinions within the narrow range, call it Republican or Democrat or whatever spectrum you want to define of that range of debate has been narrowed so much and dumbed down so much. Oh yeah, let's go through the 6 solutions of USA Today. Ratify Kyoto is one of them. The other is ask the non-industrialized countries to ratify Kyoto also. Another is to trade emission credits, which gives you the permission to pollute. So you buy up the privilege to pollute by, let's say, running your SUV. I'm sorry if you have an SUV, that's all right. We can set up confessional boxes or whatever. What was the next solution? The next one is wait and study. Another one is do nothing. USA Today is saying do nothing. And the last one is called Futuristic Technological Fixes. And do you know what ideas they had there? They had 2 ideas. One of them is to plant secondary forests, monocultures, to absorb some of the excess carbon dioxide. And another is an idea of where you put sulfate particles into the ocean that makes phytoplankton that absorbs some of the carbon dioxide. And what I say is you can do this at the source. We can have basically 0 emissions except for water vapor if we run on hydrogen fuel. We can even do it through zero-point energy or through the Randall Mills hydrogen gas cell concept or through some of the cold fusion technologies. There are many, many alternative approaches, but you see what's been missing here, and many of you could play a very big part in this revolution, I think, is find money. If you can find $10 to $100 million, then many of us could be in laboratories right now, Apollo style. I mean, wouldn't it be great if the U.S. Department of Energy really funded energy research and development in the true alternatives that give basically 0 emissions? What is Los Alamos National Labs doing, or the Lawrence Livermore Labs doing, spending billions of dollars per year on nuclear weapons research, which is the lion's share of the budget of the U.S. Department of Energy? This is craziness. We need citizen participation. And you see, Europe is a little more rational about this, and they're looking at what America is doing. And they're not very happy about what we're doing. Because you see, what America decides to do about global warming is the way the world's going to go. So it's up to us now, the Roman Empire here, to do something about this. I never dreamt that we would get to this stage. I thought I would be actively researching new stuff. You know, I'm qualified, I have the right qualifications to do it, and many of you do too. But why aren't we doing this? Could there be some source of capital that could support this work? Well, I know there are efforts, always, tireless efforts to support the work. And yet, it hasn't really happened yet to the degree of significance where it can enter the arena of public debate. And that's all I want to see. I want to see democracy work. I don't want to see democracy stolen. And democracy is being stolen in this country more than I have ever seen it. And that's even having studied some American history. So let's see, what else do we have here? This is a nice quote from the late Norman Cousins. Our current generation is committing treason against future generations by destroying our global environment. By the way, this photograph here, believe it or not, this photograph was taken about the way the crow flies, maybe 30 miles from here, 40 miles from right here, Sacramento. Yeah, it's at the Shivananda Ashram in Grass Valley. And it's an interesting photograph because this looks like a UFO, and it's really a reflection in a pond of a tree, and I put it upside down. Yes, our current generation is committing treason against future generations by destroying our global environment. And by the way, my new book, Re-Inheriting the Earth, is that has almost all these quotes in it. So what what can we do here? And now we'll get into some of the meat of the matter of solutions. I'm going to focus mostly on the technological answers because you're a techno crowd, and so anyway, first and foremost, I think we need to go over the statistics, and it's really interesting because the more I seem to get to the essence of how badly we're destroying the planet and understanding what's really happening here and how much time or how little time we have left to turn it around, and how we seem to be slipping ever further from the arena of solutions, the more I begin to embrace that and try to express it, the smaller the market becomes. I don't understand this inverse relation. Maybe it has to do with the Bertrand Russell quote, the resistance to a new idea increases as the square of its importance. Anyway, there are so many answers. I think we all realize that we can develop non-polluting energy, but we have to supplant the incredible power that the fossil fuel industry and their buddies in the White House. And by the way, Mr. Gore would not have been immune from that. He was on the board of Occidental Petroleum and helped make a decision to run a new pipeline through Alaska, so Mr. Gore is not completely immune either. But Mr. Bush is so blatantly involved in this situation. And meanwhile, Governor Gray Davis here in California is dumbed down. At least he finally raised his political rhetoric to the level that these guys are price gouging, but so what? And the energy crisis is about over anyway. Amory Levin's pointed that out. Now we're going to overbuild new fossil fuel power plants. What is this craziness? How could we have cut off our debate? How can the media deal, and I gave you the 6 so-called solutions that USA Today outlined. By the way, I wrote an impassioned letter to the editor of USA Today. To my knowledge, it's not been printed. I wonder why. It's outside the range of debate, right? Okay, energy solutions. So what kind of energy? And by the way, I think that the way I've kind of divided the problem is to first look at non-polluting energy. And by that I mean the entire list of possibilities. In the short term, we're talking about solar, wind, and hydrogen. And by the way, there's going to be a major conference on the hydrogen economy. There's some brochures in the back in Denver being put on by an organization that I'm associated with called Hydrogen Now. And that conference is going to take place November 1st to 4th of this year, so hope to see you there. So there's the energy angle, and then there's the general question of preserving, restoring, and sustaining the biosphere of the Earth. And during this Energy Summit conference, where we're going to storm the doors of the Capitol if we have to, there are other alternatives which can end the brutal destruction of the forests. Half of the forests in the world are left. And by the way, as I'm speaking, is when every second goes by, another acre of forest, mostly tropical rainforest, is gone irrevocably. Boom, every second, another acre, another acre, another acre. Something the size of Florida or half of California every year is decimated. And at the rate we're doing it, by late this century, the forests will all be gone. Does this make any sense when there's an alternative? Hemp. Hemp could replace wood for paper and for construction materials. And it can do a bunch of other things too. Biomass, although I'm a purist. Burning biomass still throws carbon in the atmosphere, albeit a lot less, and can be balanced by rotating new crops. But why do you have to do that if zero-point energy research, if that were encouraged, if cold fusion research were encouraged, if hydrogen gas cell research were supported, then you wouldn't need to deal with burning any carbon. And of course you have the hydrogen economy, and that's coming along awfully fast too. One of the things I was going to do while I was still here in Sacramento was to go to visit the folks at the California Fuel Cell Alliance, which is a group that's trying, automakers that are trying rapidly to make cars that are basically zero emission, because there's a law that says you're going to have to work toward this. The only problem right now, though, is that fuel cells are rather expensive. We all can't afford fuel cells right now, although that could change. And by fuel cells, of course, I mean devices which can take hydrogen, combine it with the oxygen in the atmosphere so that an electric current can be generated. And that electric current then allows you to run a car, home heating system, or power plant, or whatever you'd like. And it's a nice technology, but it's certainly not exotic enough. Now, exotic, we have to use that adjective, right? Because that's within the cultural context that is very idiosyncratic, cultural context that we're in. So the energy solutions, it's so obvious. Improve efficiency. Obviously, there are many things that can be done there. Amory Lovins is basically suggesting that we could, just by improving efficiency, not even changing lifestyle, just the efficiency of power plants, or increasing the gas miles for cars, and get this SUV craze behind us, that we could save 70–80% of the energy we use. To say nothing about conservation, which is something that we could do as well. And then we have the conventional renewables, solar, wind, and so forth. They certainly have come a long way. There are various breakthrough solar technologies which appear to be more efficient and cheaper. And realize, of course, that outside of the box, going outside of the box of the box. Think of a box and label it fossil fuels and nuclear power. Those would be our main energy sources. And then outside that box, we have conventional renewables, solar and wind. Wind, of course, is going up very, very rapidly. What is it now? 25% of Denmark's electricity comes from wind. And of course, also, you could take then these renewable energy sources and hook them up to a hydrogen generator through an electrolysis facility. And indeed, you could then generate hydrogen, which then becomes the main energy carrier, and very important, a replacement to fossil fuels. A lot of people don't realize that hydrogen, whether it's gas, liquid, or solid, hydrogen can be manipulated in many different ways and made very convenient as a fuel and replace fossil fuels, either through internal combustion or through the use of fuel cells. And there are folks around, people like Frank Lynch, Roger Billings, and so forth. Frank Lynch, who's a hydrogen researcher, demonstrated how he was able to easily convert a natural gas Cummings generator into a hydrogen gas generator. Just take a cylinder of hydrogen and just put it into this device, and you can get out as much as 1.2 megawatts of power just by burning and combusting hydrogen. And yeah, some people say the Hindenburg, that's ridiculous. It was kerosene that was on the Hindenburg that caused the fire. It wasn't the hydrogen, that was later. And hydrogen is actually safer than fossil fuels as an energy source. And it could be gas, solid, or liquid. Solid means metal hydride canisters that where it doesn't take much to get the hydrogen out of that. And so that's hydrogen feedstock for whatever you want. Or you could drive your car in hydrogen, and then when you're not using your car, produce more hydrogen at home using your solar collectors, there are many, many ways that you can use hydrogen as an energy carrier. And this is mundane technology, folks. This is not exotic. And yet it has been so suppressed that the word is almost like a swear word when you try to talk to a reporter. We have really dumbed down our options, and it keeps getting narrower and narrower and narrower. The debate gets narrower. But there's the appearance that there's a debate. Republicans, Democrats. There's a perfect example of that. The appearance of a debate. But there isn't really a debate going on. So somehow I think we, and by we I mean anybody interested in research on advanced concepts, clean energy concepts, we are going to have to get a little more confidence up and say that our ideas are okay. And in fact, they're not only okay, they work. We have to convince ourselves that they work and they can be implemented. But sometimes I like to draw, let's see if I have see if I brought one of my special pens. No, I didn't. But I see Hal reaching in there, perhaps. But anyway, so we have conventional renewables, the hydrogen economy, and the new energy economy. And the new energy, thank you, Hal. Boy, you come prepared. Thank you very much. If we were to, and I have to remember this is upside down. So first of all, I'm just going to draw it here. We're in the age of economics, of course, and money. And sometimes this is what I call the profit curve. Let's see. Time and money. Yeah, that's just that's money. In new energy research, we're kind of stuck at this stage. So when somebody wants to invest in this, usually the first question is, well, how soon can I get a lot of money? Right? Because we're in an age of greed. And when the investor finds out that you're really on the toe of the curve, and this happened with one investor. It's too bad. I'd like to be able to show my slides, but I can't because there's no slide projector. But I have quite a photograph here. Actually, you're in it, Hal. Actually, I could probably stick the photograph in here, the opaque projection system. But before I do that, the point here is that when you're in the toe of the curve, you're not going to, your investors are not going to be very happy. They want an assured return. And venture capitalists like to enter at about this point where you have not only commercial prototypes, but you really have something that's ready to go on the assembly line and just bang them out, and then you climb this steep curve of optimized profits. And so this is one of the dilemmas confronting the research that we're all interested in. There is no mechanism in our culture really to nurture the process of invention between this point and this point. So this is one of the problems that we have facing us. Now I'll show you this picture which kind of gives you an idea that a number of us gathered, and this was actually also the birth of the Institute for New Energy, which Hal very capably runs now from Salt Lake City. And this is the group of people. This was 1993 meeting, and then this is 94. And some of you, if you look at this, you'll notice an anomaly in this photograph. This gentleman right here, Jim Carrey. And you wonder, well, what's Jim Carrey doing with a bunch of exotic researchers, a bunch of new energy researchers? And the answer is that he was filming Dumb and Dumber. Well, we were trying to be smart and smarter. And so this is the gathered group, and there's some interesting characters in this picture. Some faces you might recognize. There's John Hutchison, there's Hal Fox, Toby Groats, Tom Bearden, Andrew Mikrowski from Canada, Shuji Inamata, who just died a few months ago. God bless him, he's a wonderful man. He's taken the end machine concept and expanded on that. Paramahamsa Tiwari, who's running a major conference in November. November is going to be a busy month in Karwar in India.
We have information that's been canceled because lack of interest.
Oh boy, canceled for lack of interest. This is, you see, folks, we got to somehow keep the flame burning. We've got to kind of work double time, triple time, to just keep it alive. This is Stefan Marinov, who is a European new energy. He was a professor of physics at the University of Graz in Austria. And to give you an idea of how the going is rough for many of these folks, he jumped from the 10th story of the library building at the University of Graz about a year ago to his death. There have been a lot of suicides. There's been a lot of suppression. The national security apparatus, if they see, I heard a reference earlier today about the dual use of an object. If it has military application, as what happened to Adam Trombly, it can be confiscated under the Secrecy Act and never see the light of day. And that's another problem with all of this. Who else is on this picture? Well, a bunch of other people. Moray King, very fine theoretical researcher. It was a good group, basically. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, the man that funded this, who was a software almost billionaire, he decided that because his marketing people basically told him that if you're not here in the curve or here so that you can dip into the river of optimized profits, then you might as well just forget it. How are we going to be able to shift our consciousness? It's a very tricky task, and I'm hoping to be able to build a fire to an ignition point for many of you to not only not give up the ghost, but to say, well, okay, we might be smaller in numbers, and we're getting older all the time, but we do have an opportunity to make a difference. I really believe that the democratic process in the long run will work, but we're going to have to work hard at it. It's not going to be an easy process. So let's go on here a little bit. Here's another quote, Rachel Carson. Through her classic book, Silent Spring, Rachel Carson in the 1960s basically created an environmental awareness. I don't know where it went, by the way, but we need it now more than ever. And this is what she said in the 1960s. We're challenged as mankind has never been challenged before to prove our maturity and our mastery, not of nature, but of ourselves. Okay, going on here. Now, I think the real problem exists then, and we're seeing it in many, many different ways. The problem, obviously, is that some multinational corporations and Western governments, the G8, if you will, have gotten so much power that it's almost an absolute powerful tyranny. And this is the exact thing that many of our past presidents warned against, that we're going to have to be vigilant. And what's in fact happening is that trade is being globalized, the so-called free trade. But what happens then is that the environment gets ruined because a large multinational corporation will want to come into a country whose environmental standards are the most relaxed and whose labor is the cheapest, so that they can optimize their profits. Now, I'm not saying that profiting is bad, because obviously entrepreneurship really works. What I'm saying is that when you become that big, and in order to be a player in the world stage, that's the way it's set up. And it makes nations very competitive with one another. And the big thing is that there's no check and balance against this unmitigated pollution and exploitation of labor on a global level, with no countervailing democratic force globally. And this, of course, is the downside of globalization. It's one of the reasons why you see these protests. Now, all we see in the American media is that these protests are a bunch of anarchists throwing rocks through windows, whereas in fact a lot of the violent ones have been planted. And that's very evident in the European press, which we don't get to see much at all. Well, this is an interesting quote from Franklin D. Roosevelt. "We must establish practical controls over blind economic forces and blindly selfish men. Without such control, technology would be a ruthless master of mankind." And you see, this is the scenario we see unfolding right now. The doomsday scenario is what I would call it. Because, boy, you know, it's interesting. David Williams here put on a conference at Berkeley a couple of years ago, similar to what we're doing here in Sacramento in the next couple of days. And Berkeley is my alma mater. I got a PhD there in astronomy in 1967, and that was during the height of the free speech movement. And it's funny because I was a former Eagle Scout, crew-cutted, soon astronaut-to-be conformist. And now I'm the radical, I guess you could say. Then I wasn't. And meanwhile, there was all this stuff brewing. It was the 60s, and Mario Savio and Sproul Howell Plaza and the whole bit. And I became an astronaut then. But then Berkeley and places like that became environmentally very aware during the 1970s. And the environmental movement really got going. Unfortunately, it then went in a strange direction because now it seems to be more like eco-warriors, but they've been dumbed down too because they don't understand all the alternatives that are available to us. But the point is that when I was at Berkeley, just 2 years ago, I was 1999, first of all, I wanted to get a hold of a copy of The State of the World, 1999. This is an annual report that's put out by the World Watch Institute, Lester Brown, and they basically give you the vital statistics of what's happening to the planet. And the more I read that book and the more I read each series, the more I realized that we are on a suicide course if we don't change things very fast and reverse this momentum of the fossil fuel addiction led by American interests. And I could not find a copy at any of the bookstores of that book. It sells 1 million a year. Nowhere. University Bookstore, Cody's Bookstore, I couldn't find a copy of The State of the World. Instead, I saw this kind of fraternity, boy, yuppie atmosphere. It was really strange. It's like the whole world is transforming. I've been hoping and praying that the world would have moved in a different direction. It just makes our job a little more challenging, a little more difficult to kind of counteract some of this. Can you imagine George W. Bush saying something like this? You can see what I mean about the times we're in, because of course he's just the opposite. I'm not trying to praise Roosevelt, by the way. I'm going to quote from some other presidents as well. So what are some of the things that we can do to get from here to there? Because it's obvious that the problem is not a technological problem. We all realize that the solutions do lie there in our minds and in our laboratories. So the question is, how are we going to be able to socially implement this? How are we going to be able to play this game? One of them, I think, is absolutely essential, and I've already mentioned it, is the freedom of trade needs to be counterbalanced by a democratic structure globally. In other words, globalization, what's happening is the greed has taken over, and we don't have any countervailing public participation in the process. And so a global green democracy would be one way to do it. And there's a colleague of mine in Britain, his name is John Bunzel, B-U-N-Z-L, and he has created an idea called the Simultaneous Policy, which is a very interesting concept. It's sort of like the Kyoto process. And basically the Simultaneous Policy says that we're going to debate what this better world's going to look like, but we're not going to interfere with business as usual. So let business as usual unfold, but you conceptualize, you dream up a policy, which makes sense. And we realize that the current policies don't make sense. That's clear. So, I mean, it could be a number of simple little things, like a global democratic structure that enforces emission standards or creates a maybe minimum wage for labor in the third world. Whatever it is, end third world debt. There are a number of different policies that this could consist of, and it could be debated between now and the time of its implementation. And then as individuals and as non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, and so forth, we can adopt that policy anytime. By adopt means that I agree in principle with what this policy is. And then you just kind of wait. Well, you then get countries to begin to ratify it. Like right now with Kyoto, the only country it looks like that's not ratifying it is the United States. Maybe Japan, I don't know, that's kind of iffy. Well, there would be such moral pressure, and I'm sure that the way the scenario would unfold is the United States would be the last holdout on this simultaneous policy. But as soon as all nations ratify it, boom, paradigm shift. We implement the new policy. You know, you're going to have to deal with ideas like that, because otherwise this David and Goliath scenario is just not going to work for us. So, form a global green democracy, and maybe the first step to do that is to create the simultaneous policy that would be considered by all nations and eventually ratified, and then boom, implementation as soon as all the countries ratify it. Can you imagine if we were the only holdout by then, and we go ahead with some nuclear missile defense or some crazy cockamamie scheme, how embarrassing it would be in the eyes of the world. There are some other steps here too that I won't get into, but I will in my workshop, and it sounds like we'll be doing it this afternoon, a little later, whenever the organizers would like me to do it. Maybe 3-ish, 4-ish, whenever I'll be glad to do it. And even if it's a discussion group, we'll sit around and have a dialogue. I'm going to be taking a tour of Europe in September and October. And with each group, what I'm going to do, it's going to be like a 2-day workshop. And the first day is some of this presentation material. The second day is dialogue. I really want to hear what people in Scotland, people in England, people in France, Portugal, Germany, I want to know how they think, what they're thinking right now. I think I know what you folks are thinking, because you're mostly researchers interested in new technologies that could really make a difference in the world. And I say, right on, you're kindred spirits. You're a very select group, and this hall should be full of people. And it will someday.
So it's a small group there.
A small group. Yeah, I know. So it just means that the load for every individual is greater proportionally. That's what it means. For a while there, I got my ego into all of this stuff, and I said, well, Brian, your audiences keep getting smaller and smaller as you become more and more relevant. But then it occurred to me that, well, that's what's happening. We're striking a nerve here. We're outside of a box which is outside of a box. And it's even hard to sell the governor here on improving energy efficiency and developing solar and wind power, which is and hydrogen economy, which is such an obvious here and now technology that's been with us about 100 years plus, in some cases. And meanwhile, here we're advocating free energy, zero-point energy, whatever you want to call it. And a very important aspect of this, I think, is create and support a new science of consciousness. And this is one of my pitches. We'll get into that in more detail tomorrow, but suffice it to say that there is some very exciting research going on with a number of individuals. I'm familiar, for example, with the work of Professor Emeritus Bill Tiller from Stanford University, who's done excellent work on meditators changing the properties of water through their intention. And so there really is magic out there. There is exotic research going on But the exotic research that's going on, of course, has been suppressed and denied, and yet it could provide the very thing that we can use. Okay, a couple of other things, and how am I doing in time? Should we wrap this up in the next few minutes? Okay, well, I'll go a little further, a little longer. Oh, good. Yeah, the global green democracy is what I call this concept. I mean, again, I think that most of you don't have to leap too far because you're involved in research that's right there on the raggedy edge anyway, so why not just go for it? Conceptualize what you want. See your dream just like Robert Goddard did, and go for it. So the global green democracy, what we want is ecological sustainability and beauty. Now, ecological sustainability is a pretty easy thing to define when you look at the basic life support systems of the earth, such as water, energy, lumber, agricultural output. These are just basics. Food supply, and all of these things can be defined. And it's obviously very unsustainable right now. And we're really in a difficult way. I don't understand. It just doesn't add up. The politicians, I don't think there's a single politician out there. There might be a few here and there in lower positions, who can begin to understand and fathom what it is that we need to do to create a sustainable future for humanity. But you see, that cuts into the profits of the oil companies, it cuts into the profits of the lumber companies, of the Monsantos of the world, the Enrons of the world, and that's a no-no. It can't be touched. It's sacrosanct. See, we've gone from one person, one vote to $1, one vote in our culture, and we've got to somehow turn that around. A lasting, enforceable world peace and world government. We're going to need some sort of governance structure. I know that government can get in the way of private enterprise. We all realize that. But we're not talking about, what we really want to do is support the inventor, the entrepreneur, and to bring their concept to reality. And at the same time, control the obsessive profit structures of the large multinational corporations and the Western governments. And this is the kind of thing that once we face these issues, then I think we can have the ecological sustainability, the social justice, the conversion from military and highly polluting industries and activities, from the polluting activities and military activities to peaceful future. And so important and this is sort of the bottom line. If you don't remember anything else I say today, remember this, that you guys are mostly into research and development. And that is the very thing that's happening at the toe of the profit curve that I had thought, being an American, that we're in the land of innovation, and of course we're going to have the infrastructure through our government to fund those concepts that are most promising. And right now, the one we're facing that's number one on the list is the generation of clean energy, renewable energy. And yet, that's the very area that's been neglected. Well, that's a crime. Somehow or other, my dream and vision is to have, and I know it's yours too, Hal, is to have a research and development park, a place which would research solutions. And I know it's your ideas too, David, and many of you out there, that we're going to somehow we either need funding from angels, excuse me, altruistic funding where you're in the toe of the profit curve and you're going to have to throw some money after, concepts that won't pan out commercially. So you may not become the Bill Gates of new energy. So what? I mean, we're talking about the whole planet here. Bill Gates could spare 1% of his wealth. We'd be well on our way to having new energy. I don't, excuse me, I know I'm coming down with something. We don't have a simple answer, it seems, to the conundrum of funding. But if any of you have any contact with people with money, I couldn't think of a better way to spend it than research and development on new energy options and looking at a whole bunch of them, not favoring any particular technology until it gets to the point where we can then sensibly make a choice for commercial implementation. Here's a Thomas Jefferson quote. Now, remember, in those times, it's not that dissimilar to now. What's happening now is the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. We understand that gulf. The gulf is huge. Like the 225, this is Forbes magazine, 225 wealthiest people on the planet have more money now than the annual incomes of half the world, 3 billion people. Is that fair? No. It's certainly not fair. And here's Thomas Jefferson speaking. And you have to understand, and you know, this is a president who is passionate. And he said, I hope we shall crush in its birth the aristocracy of moneyed corporations, which dare already challenge our government to a trial of strength and bid defiance to the laws of our country. I mean, this is what democracy is about, and we've been asleep at the wheel. And we have to reawaken ourselves. And I know in my discourse, I deal with two different subjects, and I try to weave them into each other, and it makes me very lonely because no publisher wants to market this, because it mixes two subjects that involve two different communities. One is the whole sustainability movement, the global sustainability movement, which I respect very much, a lot of the work that's being done there, but they put themselves in a box because they already have made up their mind about solutions. And then the other movement, which is, for lack of a better word, I say greater truths, but maybe I could call it new science, exotic research. That's the other department, you see. And to get those two blended and weaved into a tapestry of a story about our future, which could become very, very vital, essential for our survival. Okay, so that's a Thomas Jefferson quote. Here comes, this is my friend Bob the Pig. I'm into pigs, by the way. I don't know why, but that's just the way it is. Here's an Abraham Lincoln quote. To sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards out of men. Nowadays we'd say men and women, but you get the gist. These are brilliant quotes. Can you imagine George W. Bush saying anything like that? Here's another Franklin Roosevelt quote. Wonderful quote. The truth is that liberty is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to the point where it becomes stronger than that of their democratic state itself. That, in essence, is fascism. And I think it's a brilliant quote because it's appropriate for what's happening now. And I don't want the bathwater of entrepreneurship and innovation to be thrown out with the very dirty bathwater that's imposed by our multinational corporations and partners in governance. And that's, of course, what's happening now. Here's another quote. This is another one that I like. This is from Eisenhower, and actually this was 1961. And this is a part of the last speech he gave when he was president in 1961. Listen to this, it's strong stuff. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. That's when the word was coined, by the way, that phrase. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist, we must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals so that security and liberty may prosper together. Now, this speech of Eisenhower's, there is one interpretation which I tend to favor. And here we're talking about a whole different subject, one that, since many of you research UFOs, why not mention it? Is that very recently, my colleague Steve Greer, who is an emergency room physician who has been very dedicated to the question of, well, what do you know or don't know about UFOs, and do they exist, and what's your experience with it? And Greer has taken it upon himself for the last 10, 15 years to identify and interview witnesses who allegedly have had UFO experiences. And a narrative is coming together which is fairly self-consistent. I can't say I 100% support it, by the way. It's being thrown out for discussion. Is that the narrative is that around the time of Eisenhower, when the modern era of ufology was born, basically with the Roswell event in 1947, that around 1950, in the 50s, early 50s, when Eisenhower was president, he had some choices about whether to stay on top of the information or just let it just delegate it to black ops. And black ops then began to have an energy of its own. And this, I think, is what Eisenhower was referring to, because he sensed that he lost his grasp of power through the democratic system on some of these secrets. Secrets which many of you are onto. We heard a great talk earlier this morning about anti-gravity propulsion, and I fully believe that's around the corner. Some of it could be reverse engineered, and some of it can be just out of your own minds. And however that's done, this disclosure project begins to identify a huge black ops operation, which has been keeping these secrets, the secrecy of not only propulsion system, but the secrecy of basically new energy, free energy, which has been suppressed and kept away from the cultural mainstream. We got just a couple more here, and then I think I'll wind this down, and then we'll pick up again this afternoon later. We'll have a workshop, and we'll have more time for discussion. This is a quote from Professor John Mack at Harvard University. There is an exotic research that's going on now on questions such as this. And so I can tell that many of you are probably open to this information, although you think that, well, show me kind of thing. John Mack is a psychiatrist who has studied the so-called abduction phenomenon. These are people that claim to have had encounters with UFO craft or aliens. And so here's the quote. "It seems to me quite possible that the protection of the Earth's life is at the heart of the abduction phenomenon." In other words, we're talking about the big banana here. We're talking about the survival of the Earth and what our species is doing to the Earth. Abductees are repeatedly informed that the hybrid breeding project is related to the perilous state of the Earth's ecology and is being conducted for the purposes of both human and alien species. The Earth is indeed a jewel in the cosmic crown, and our increasing destruction of life appears to be a crime of cosmic proportion. So all I'm trying to do is to come up with this case from many, many directions. I just want to show you a little tantalizing photograph here. The face on Mars and similar issues never seem to die, in spite of official NASA's point of view. And a number of thousands of pictures were released in the Mars Global Surveyor mission about a month month ago, and this is one of them, which is quite remarkable morphologically. I can't argue scientifically that there's anything to this photograph. It could be completely natural and just coincidentally a face, but this appeared recently. And now we're getting near the end. This is a wonderful quote for those of you that might feel discouraged at times. Every society honors its live conformists and dead troublemakers. And it is true, you know, many of us are troublemakers, and we might be dead before much happens. But you'd be surprised at how much of a difference you can make, even having done what you did and dying. And then finally, another Abraham Lincoln quote, which I think also applies to many of us here. Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. Thank you.
Brian.